So I have talked about both of these books before. I mentioned this one as one that I wanted to read, but I put off reading it because I know how the story ends when Alex dies very young for an African gray parrot. I have also lost parrots young. It's a risk you run. They are long-lived but also delicate animals. And so I was putting off reading it, but she actually starts with this, and then after that it's the story of his life, and it's a very uplifting book. And then this one I mentioned that if I were trying to put together a Harvard Classics type thing for today, this would be on it, even though it's a relatively recent book. And the reason that The Secret Life of Bats by Merlin Tuttle would be on my own version of the Harvard Classics is because it's interesting the stuff he found out about bats, but it's absolutely fascinating how he basically won friends and influenced people, because at the time he was working, people had a very negative view of bats, as though bats spread rabies, and he introduced people to actually they control insects that are both, they spread disease to humans, and they control agricultural pests. And so he got people all over the world to stop persecuting insect-eating bats. Although he had to make trade-offs in this, like vampire bats are not a huge threat to livestock, but they are annoying to livestock ranchers, and they cause some harm. And so in order to make his views on insect-eating bats and how you need to preserve them credible, he had to show them this is how you kill the vampire bats, which was upsetting to him, but he also knew they're not an endangered species. And by killing off the bats that the farmers saw as pets, he was able to give himself credibility that the insect-eating bats were eating the insects that cause problems for the animals and also for agriculture for the pastoralists. And so this was interesting on that grounds. But then both of these books were interesting for another reason, which is both of these people, Merlin Tuttle and Irene Pepperberg, had a vision for their lives that they started a foundation to pursue and made it. They got through a lot of difficulty because this was their top priority in life, and they sort of built everything around that. And I have said that I think all of us need to feel like we have a connection to the future, to have something to live for, to sort of motivate us. And for most of us, that is probably going to be having kids, biological kids. I think Tuttle did. Pepperberg specifically did not, because she was starting at a time when women had kids, they were expected to retire and take care of the kids. And so in order to do her research, she needed to not have kids, and then she had a falling out with her husband because she was not making a profit and she was not getting faculty positions and she was having trouble funding her research. And he's like, well, I'm the one making all the income and you're just doing this research on bird intelligence that nobody's taking seriously. Why don't you actually start? Because I think it was chemistry. It was something that would have paid really well if she'd gotten a job doing it. But she didn't want to do that. And so they ended up getting separated and I guess eventually divorced. And then she devoted her life to studying intelligence in birds. And I grew up, like, by the time that I was a kid, Alex was already well known and people were taking the idea that birds could have human-like intelligence very seriously. And so that was the case all my life. But even shortly before, like up through the middle of the 80s, I think, early to mid 80s, that people believed. So if you look at the brains of mammals versus birds, mammals have a neocortex that birds don't have. And so they're like, well, birds don't have a neocortex. How can they have human-like intelligence? And now we know that parrots and songbirds, at least, and a few other groups do show human-like intelligence, but it's through an expansion of the midbrain. So it is convergent evolution, but it's not parallel evolution. But at any rate, you had to prove phenomenologically what Alex could do. And that was hard to get people to accept because the assumption was just, yeah, birds can't be intelligent because of the structure of their brains. And plus, she was a woman doing this, and she was working outside of her field because her background was in chemistry, and so she had a lot of things against her, but she believed in, I forget how she mentioned learning about parrots, but once she started working with Alex, she really was like, I believe in this, I believe parrots are way smarter than people give them credit for, and she devoted her life to doing that. She started the Alex Foundation, which depended on money. She had friends and colleagues who were frequently giving her lab space and often letting her live in their houses while she wasn't really bringing in an income, but she was able to make this her life's work and made a huge impact on our understanding of avian intelligence. And she was working in parallel with a guy who I have his book, but I haven't read it. It's in another room, in Crow Research, who she talks about as well. And I had and I'm like, I need to read it. I still haven't. And then Tuttle, again, he was interested in bats from a young age. And he was like, I think people don't appreciate how interesting and beneficial these are. Like, they're not just, they do spread rabies, but they don't really tend to interact with humans in a way that's a risk, and they control insects that spread all sorts of diseases. So overall, bats are a net benefit for disease risk. And a big part of what funded his work is he would take first photographs and also write articles for National Geographic, which nowadays that would be a lot harder to break into, but it was work for him to do this. And then he started his own bat conservation group that people funded, and he was able to devote his life to this. And so I find this interesting. Both of these people, they made a huge impact in how we understand birds and bats respectively, or how we understand at least parrots and bats respectively, based on, like, one person can make a difference when you have a clear goal of what you're trying to do, and you're willing to make that your goal. And I don't have any one thing, like, to the degree that either of them do. For me, my goal is I want to find a partner to have kids first, and everything's going to come second. But I mean, even trying to make a business is because that's the best way to that. And then I want to do my writing. But I really admire people like this, and I find this interesting, and I definitely recommend both of these books. Wanted to talk about this quickly. Thanks for watching. I'm Magpie. This here is Leela, who is a Quaker parrot, and I'll see y'all in the next one.